In this lesson, you're going to learn how to use the square root method for solving quadratic equations. Now, we're going to start by solving two equations together, and then we're going to discuss what types of quadratic equations can be solved using this technique. Now, I think the most important thing about the square root method is really we're doing nothing special. We're just using our basic equation solving strategies that we already know about. So let's first look at 3x squared minus 3 is equal to 13. I want to isolate my variable, so I want to isolate x squared. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. 3x squared equals 16. I want to undo the multiplication, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3. X squared is equal to 16 divided by 3. I'm just going to leave that as a fraction. All right, here we go. This is why it's called the square root method, because to get x all by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of x squared is just squared, and we're going to take the square root of 16/3. Now, this is really important. With the square root, we want both the positive and the negative square root. All right, so now it's just a question of simplifying this radical. I can't have a fraction under the radical sign, so this simplifies to plus or minus the square root of 16 over the square root of 3. And lovely, square root of 16 is simply 4. All right, so the next step now is, remember, we can't have radicals in our denominator. So I'm going to multiply the denominator by the square root of 3 and the numerator by the square root of 3. So x is equal to plus or minus 4 times the square root of 3. And then the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is simply 3. All right, so then our solutions to this equation are either negative 4 square root of 3 times 3, because when we actually go and enter that into x and square it, it's going to become a positive number, or it can be positive 4 square root of 3 over 3. All right, great. So there's our first example of the square root method. Let's come look at our second example here. The quantity x minus 1 squared minus 2 is equal to 7. All right, same thing. So here, our variable x is in that binomial x minus 1 being squared. So I want to isolate this binomial that's being squared. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. X minus 1 is equal to 9. Oops, x minus 1 squared. Great. At this point, because this side is being squared, I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. I'll be left on this side with simply x minus 1. And over here, the square root of 9. And again, both the positive and the negative root. So x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 3. All right, we still haven't isolated x yet. So we actually have two smaller problems. Our first problem is x minus 1 is equal to positive 3. Or our second problem is x minus 1 is equal to negative 3. So here x is equal to 4. Add 1 to both sides, x is equal to negative 2. So the solution to this equation, negative 2 or 4. All right, now that we've seen how to use the square root method to solve two example quadratic equations, this leads me to the big I wonder question. I wonder, can all quadratic equations be solved using this technique? All right, so I have 4 different examples here. Let's kind of go through and give a yay or a nay. So we've just seen 3x squared minus 3 equals 13. Yes, we could totally solve that one, as we could the second one. All right, let's look at the next one. 3x squared minus 3x equals 13. I'm going to tell you this one cannot be solved using the square root method. So take a minute, pause me. What is different about this one? All right, here is the piece that is different. Because our variable x is being both squared, but then also it's here raised to the first power, just plain x, we're going to be unable to isolate just the x squared and not have an x on the other side. So it can't be used for this one. How about this equation? Same thing, because we have an x squared, but then also x to the first power, this cannot be solved using the square root method. All right, so this leads us to our really big idea here. And I'm going to say it and then pause and we'll write it down. But the big idea is that the square root method can be used when the variable is only being squared or is only in a binomial being squared. All right, so let's pause and I'm gonna write that down and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So again, here's this big idea. The square root method can only be used if the variable is only being squared, like this example, or the variable is only in a binomial being squared, in this example. In these other two, the variable was not only being squared, it was also being raised to the first power in both of those.